Okay, so we'll be starting our readings for this year, Winter Retreat 2025, and theme of traditional practices of the forest Ajahns. And so, I think I'll start with some of this collected teachings of Ajahn Lee Dhammadaro and touch on Luang Por Chah a little bit, and then we'll take it from there. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So when we take, take the precepts, 5 precepts, 8 precepts, we start with the refuges. So actually these are from the collected writings of Ajahn Lee. Not many of the Krupa Ajahns actually wrote things themselves, but Ajahn Lee is one of the few that did. And so he very thoroughly describes the refuges. So I'll go into that here, and we'll see how far we get. Buddha. Bhutang saranang gacchami. I go to the Buddha for refuge. Ordinarily, for the world to experience happiness and harmony, there has to be a teaching or tradition generally respected as good. This being the case, bodhisattvas arise, people who develop goodness on the grand scale for the sake of attaining right self-awakening. Once they have reached this goal, they are termed Buddhas, awakened ones. For bodhisattvas to succeed in this way, they have to give themselves over to perfecting 10 qualities. 1. Dana parami, generosity. 2. Sila parami, virtue. 3. Nekama parami, renunciation of sensuality. 4. Panya parami, the search for discernment. 5. Virya parami, persistence. 6. Kanti parami, endurance or patience. 7. Satya parami, truthfulness. 8. Adhitthana parami, determination. 9. Metta parami, goodwill. 10. Upekkha parami, equanimity. In proper cases, i.e. in areas that are beyond one's control. These 10 perfections are the factors that enable a bodhisattva to succeed in becoming an arahant, a pure one in the world. Once he attains this state, 3 qualities, called actualized virtues, arise in the heart. That's Visuddhi guna, purity, Panya guna, sharp discernment, and Karuna diguna, compassion for living beings throughout the world. That's normally talked about in the Thai forest tradition, 3 qualities of the Buddha, that wisdom, compassion, and purity. These qualities enable the Buddha to teach the Dhamma in a beneficial way. His conduct in this area is of 3 sorts. Having achieved his own purposes, he acts for the benefit of living beings throughout the world and teaches the Dhamma to his own circle of relatives as well. There are 3 aspects to the Buddha. 1, the physical aspect, the body, the properties, aggregates, sense media, which is the external aspect of the Buddha, called Buddha nimitta, or the symbol of the Buddha. This is like the bark of a tree. 2, the good practices he followed, such as virtue, concentration, and discernment, which are aspects of his activity. These are called Dhamma nimitta of the Buddha, symbols of his inner qualities. These are the sapwood. 3, vimutti, release from ignorance, craving, clinging, and kama, attaining nibbana, the supreme quality, a quality that does not die. This is the heartwood, or essence of the Buddha. A person of little intelligence will use bark to build himself a home. A person of medium intelligence will use sapwood, while a person of sharp intelligence will build their home of heartwood. So it is with those of us who take refuge in the Buddha. We're like the three types of people who take wood to build ourselves a home. But in any case, we're better off than people without a home, like rats or lizards who have to live in the hollows of trees and are in for trouble if people set the trees on fire. If we place our trust in our bodies, our worldly possessions, or our livelihood, we'll have no refuge when the fires of death reach us. Or as when a boat sinks in the middle of the ocean, a person without a life vest is in serious danger. For this reason, we should educate ourselves so as to find a refuge that will benefit us both in this life and in lives to come. Another comparison. The sages of the past used the term Buddha Ratana, comparing the Buddha to a jewel. Now there are three sorts of jewels: artificial gems, gemstones such as rubies or sapphires, and diamonds, which are held to be the highest. The aspects of the Buddha might be compared to these three sorts of jewels. To place confidence in the external aspect, the body of the Buddha, or images made to represent him, is like dressing up with artificial gems. To show respect for the practices followed by the Buddha by giving rise to them within ourselves is like dressing up with rubies and sapphires. To reach the quality of deathlessness is like dressing in diamonds from head to toe. But no matter what sort of jewels we use to dress up in, we're better off than savages who go around hanging animal bones or human bones from their necks, who look unkempt and, what's more, are bound to be haunted by the bones they wear. The bones here stand for our own bones, i.e., our attachment to the body as really being ours. Actually, our body comes for the most part from the bodies of other animals, the food we've eaten. So how can we seriously take it to be our own? Whoever insists on regarding the body as his or her own should be called a savage or a swindler, and as a swindler is bound to receive punishment in proportion to the crime. So we should regard the body as money borrowed for the span of a lifetime, to be used as capital, and we should search for profits so as to release ourselves from our debts by searching for another, better form of goodness, the qualities of the Buddha that he left as teachings for all of his followers. These qualities, briefly put, are 1. Sati, the continual mindfulness or wakefulness found in the factors of jhana. 2. Panya, the intuitive discernment that comes from developing the mind in concentration. 3. Vimutti, release from defilement. These are qualities that all Buddhists should develop within themselves so as to gain awakening, following the example of the Buddha, becoming Savaka Buddhas or disciple Buddhas, an opportunity open, without exception, with no restrictions of time or place, to all who follow these teachings. Buddhists who revere the Buddha in the full sense of the word should have two sorts of symbols with them to serve as reminders of their tradition. 1. Buddha nimitta, representatives of the Buddha, such as Buddha images or stupas in which relics of the Buddha are placed. This sort of reminder is like a nation's flag. 2. Buddha guna, the qualities that form the inner symbol of the Buddha, i.e., the proper practice of his teachings. Whoever takes a stand in this manner is bound to be victorious, both within and without, safe from such enemies as temptation and mortality. Our nation's flag and the people of our nation are two different things. Just as our flag will have value only if the people of our nation are good and preserve the fullness of the nation's qualities, so too we Buddhists have to respect both our flag, images of the Buddha, and the qualities of the Buddha if we are to turn ourselves into good Buddhists. Otherwise, we will suffer from not having fulfilled our responsibilities. To take an example, we Thai people, in order to be Thai in the full sense, have to possess a number of qualifications: the ability to speak and to read Thai, acquaintance with Thai customs and traditions, the ability to benefit ourselves, and to spread those benefits to help care for the needs of our parents, spouses, and children. And not only that, if we have the ability and the energy, physical, mental, financial, or the energy of our virtues, we should expand those benefits to help other groups in general, our companions in happiness and suffering throughout the nation. This is what it means to be Thai in the full sense of the word. In the same way, we who revere images of the Buddha and the Buddha's good qualities should have them with us at all times if we are to receive the full benefits that come from respecting the Buddha's teachings and to maintain the peace and well-being of Buddhists at large. Dhammang saranang gacchami. I go to the Dhamma for refuge. There are 3 levels to the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. 1. Pariyatti Dhamma, studying the words of the Buddha as recorded in the canon, the discipline, the discourses, and the Abhidhamma. 2. Patipatti Dhamma, following the practice of virtue, concentration, and discernment as derived from one's study of the canon. 3. Pativedha Dhamma, that is Nibbana. The study of the Dhamma can be done in any of 3 ways. Studying like a water viper, studying for the sake of emancipation, studying to be a storehouse keeper. Studying like a water viper means that to study the words of the Buddha without then putting them into practice, having no sense of shame at doing evil, disobeying the training rules of the Vinaya, making oneself like a poisonous snakehead, full of the fires of greed, anger, and delusion. Studying for the sake of emancipation means to study the Buddha's teachings out of a desire for merit and wisdom, with a sense of conviction and high regard for their worth. And then, once we have reached an understanding, bringing our thoughts, words, and deeds into line with those teachings with a high sense of reverence and respect. Some people try to change themselves to be in line with the Buddha's words. To try to change the Buddha's teachings to be in line with ourselves is the wrong approach, because when we're ordinary, run-of-the-mill people, we're for the most part full of defilements, cravings, views, and conceits. If we act in this way, we're bound to be more at fault than those who try to bring themselves into line with the teachings. Such people are very hard to find fault with. Studying to be a storehouse keeper refers to the education of people who no longer have to be trained, i.e., arhants, the highest level of the noble ones. Some arahants, when they were still ordinary, run-of-the-mill people, heard the Dhamma directly from the Buddha once or twice, and were able to immediately reach the highest attainment. This being the case, they lacked a wide-ranging knowledge of worldly conventions and traditions, and so, with an eye to benefit of other Buddhists, they were willing to undergo a certain amount of further education. This way of studying the Dhamma is called sikkhakarawata, respect for the training. The practice of the Dhamma means to conduct oneself in line with the words of the Buddha as gathered under 3 headings. That's virtue, proper behavior, free from vice and harm in terms of one's words and deeds, concentration, intentness of mind centered on one of the themes of meditation, such as the breath, discernment, insight and circumspection with regard to all fabrications, i.e., the properties, aggregates, and sense media. To conduct oneself in this manner is termed practicing the Dhamma. By and large, though, Buddhists tend to practice the Dhamma in a variety of ways that aren't in line with the true path of practice. If we were to classify them, there would be 3 types. 1 is loka dipateya, putting the world first. These are 3 things that Lungpa Liam likes to talk about. Loka dipateya, putting the world first. And 2 is atta dipateya, putting the self first. 3 is dhamma dipataya, putting the Dhamma first. To put the world first means to practice for the sake of such worldly rewards as status, material gains, honor, praise, and sensual pleasures. When we practice in this way, we're actually torturing ourselves because undesirable things are bound to occur. Having attained status, we can lose it. Having acquired material gains, we can lose them. Having received praise, we can receive censure. Having experienced pleasure, we can see it disintegrate. Far from the paths, fruitions, and nibbana, we torture ourselves by clinging to these things as our own. To put the self first means to practice in accordance with our own opinions, acting in line with whatever those opinions may be. Most of us tend to side with ourselves, getting stuck in our own views and conceits, because our study of the Dhamma hasn't reached the truth of the Dhamma, and so we take as our standard our own notions, composed of 4 forms of personal bias, and these are called the agati, the biases. Chandagati, doing whatever we feel like doing. 2, Abhayagiri, fearing certain forms of power or authority, and thus not daring to practice the Dhamma as we truly should. Dosagati, acting under the power of anger, defilement, craving, conceits, and views. And then Mohagati, practicing misguidedly, not studying or searching for what is truly good, assuming that we're already smart enough, or else that we're too stupid to learn, staying buried in our habits, with no thought of extracting ourselves from our sensual pleasures. All of these ways of practice are called putting the self first. To put the Dhamma first means to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, seeing that there really is good, there really is evil, there really is stress, that stress has a cause, that it disbands, and that there is a cause for its ceasing. Right resolve, always thinking of how to rid ourselves of whatever qualities we know to be wrong and immoral, seeing the harm in sensual desires, and that they bring on suffering and stress. Right speech, speaking the truth, not saying anything divisive or inciting, not saying anything coarse or vulgar in places where such words would not be proper, or to people to whom they would not be proper to say, not saying anything useless. Even though what we say may be worthwhile, if our listener isn't interested, then our words would still count as useless. Right action, being true to our duties, not acting in ways that would be corrupt or bring harm to ourselves or others. Right livelihood, obtaining wealth in ways that are honest, searching for it in a moral way and using it in a moral way. Right effort, persisting in ridding ourselves of all that is wrong and harmful in our thoughts, words, and deeds, persisting in giving rise to what would be good and useful to ourselves and others in our thoughts, words, and deeds, without a thought for the difficulty or weariness involved. Acting persistently so as to be a mainstay to others, except in cases that are beyond our control. Right mindfulness, being firmly mindful in the correct way, making sure, before we act or speak, not to act or speak through the power of inattention or forgetfulness, making sure to be constantly mindful in our thoughts. Right concentration, keeping the mind firmly centered in the correct way. No matter what we do or say, no matter what moods may strike the heart keeps its poise firm and unflinching in the 4 jhanas. These 8 factors can be reduced to 3, virtue, concentration, and discernment, called the middle way, the heart of the Buddha's teachings. The middleness of virtue means to be pure in thought, word, and deed, acting out of compassion, seeing that the life of others is like your own, that their possessions are like your own, feeling goodwill, loving others as much as yourself. When you and they are equal in this way, you are bound to be upright in your behavior, like a well-balanced burden that, when placed on your shoulders, doesn't cause you to tip to one side or the other. But even then, you're still in a position of having to shoulder a burden, so you are taught to focus the mind on a single preoccupation. This can be called holding in your hands, i.e., holding the mind in the middle, or concentration. The middleness of concentration means focusing on the present, not sending your thoughts into the past or future, holding fast to a single preoccupation. That's the anapanaka jhana, or absorption into the breath. As for the middleness of discernment, no matter what preoccupations may come passing by, you're able to rid yourself of all feelings of liking or disliking, approval or rejection. You don't cling, even to the one preoccupation that has arisen as a result of your own actions. You put down what you have been holding in your hands, You don't fasten onto the past, present, or future. This is release. When our virtue, concentration, and discernment are all in the middle of this way, we're safe. Just as a boat going down the middle of a channel or a car that doesn't run off the side of the road can reach its destination without beaching or running into a stump, so too, people who practice in this way are bound to reach the qualities they aspire to, culminating in the paths and fruitions leading to Nibbana, which is the main point of the Buddha's teachings. So in short, putting the Dhamma first means to search solely for purity of heart. The attainment of the Dhamma refers to the attainment of the highest quality, Nibbana. If we refer to the people who reach this attainment, there are four sorts. 1. Those who develop just enough tranquility and discernment to act as a basis for advancing to liberating insight, and who thus attain Nibbana, having mastered only the knowledge that does away with the fermentation of defilement. 2. Those who attain te vijo, those who attain the three skills. 3. Chalabinyo, those who attain the 6 intuitive powers. 4. Chatupati sambhida pato, those who attain the 4 forms of acumen. To explain the first one, sukha vipassiko, those who develop insight more than tranquility, vipassana, or liberating insight, and the awareness that does away with the fermentation of defilement differ only in name. In actuality, they refer to the same thing, the only difference being that vipassana refers to the beginning stage of insight, and asavakaya jnana, the final stage, clear and true comprehension of the Four Noble Truths. To explain the 3 skills, the te vijo, and I'm going to leave out some of these long Pali words to not perplex us too much. 1 is the ability to remember past lives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100, 1,000, depending on one's powers of intuition. This is a basis for proving whether death is followed by rebirth or annihilation. 2, the knowledge of where living beings are reborn, on refined levels or base, after they die. 3, the awareness that enables one to do away with the fermentations in one's character, that is, sensuality, states of becoming, and ignorance. To explain the 6 intuitive powers, those are 1, the ability to display miracles, becoming invisible, walking on a dry path through a body of water, levitating, going through rain without getting wet, going through fire without getting hot, making a crowd of people appear to be only a few, making a few appear to be many, making oneself appear young or old as one likes. Be interesting. Being able to use the power of the mind to influence events in various ways. 2 is the Dibasota, clairaudience, the ability to hear far distant sounds beyond ordinary human powers. 3 is the ability to know the thoughts of others. 4, the ability to remember previous lives. 5, the Dibachaku, or clairvoyance, the divine eye. The ability to see far distant objects beyond ordinary human powers. Some people can even see other levels of being with their clairvoyant powers. One way of proving whether death is followed by rebirth or annihilation, and whether or not there really are other levels of being. And the last intuitive power is the awareness that does away with the defilements. And to explain the 4 forms of acumen, those are: 1 is the acumen with regard to the sense of the Dhamma and of matters in general, knowing how to explain various points in line with their proper meaning. 2 is the acumen with regard to all mental qualities. 3 is the acumen with regard to linguistic conventions. This can include the ability to know the languages of living beings in general. 4 is the acumen in speaking on the spur of the moment, knowing how to answer any question so as to clear up the doubts of the person asking, like the Venerable Nagasena. This ends the discussion of the virtues of the 4 classes of people called arhants, who have reached the ultimate quality, Nibbana. As for the essence of what it means to be an arhant, though, there is only one point: freedom from defilement. This is what it means to attain the Dhamma, the other virtues being simply adornment. The 3 levels of Dhamma we have discussed are, like the Buddha, compared to jewels. There are many kinds of jewels to choose from, depending on how much wealth or discernment we have. All of the qualities we have mentioned so far, to put them briefly so as to be of use, come down to this. Practice so as to give rise to virtue, concentration, and discernment within yourself. Otherwise, you won't have a refuge or shelter. A person without the qualities that provide refuge and shelter is like a person without a home, a delinquent or a vagrant who is bound to wander shiftlessly about. Such people are hollow inside, like a clock without any workings. Even though it has a face and hands, it can't tell anyone where it is, what time it is, or whether it's morning, noon, or night, i.e., such people that forget they are going to die. People who aren't acquainted with the Dhamma within themselves are like people blind from birth. Even though they are born in the world of human beings, they don't know the light of the sun and the moon that give brightness to human beings. They get no benefit from the light of the sun and the moon, or the light of fire, and being blind, they then go about proclaiming to those who can see that there is no sun, no moon, and no brightness to the world. As a result, they mislead those whose eyes are already a little bleary. In other words, some groups say that the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha don't exist, that they were invented to fool the gullible. Now, the Dhamma is something subtle and fine, like the fire potential that exists in the air or in various elements, and that, if we have enough common sense, can be drawn out and put to use. But if we're fools, we can sit staring at a bamboo tube, a device for starting a fire that works on the same principle as the diesel engine, from dawn to dusk without ever seeing fire at all. Anyone who believes that there is no Buddha, Dhamma, or Sangha, no series of paths or fruitions leading to Nibbana, no consciousness that experiences death and rebirth, is like the fool sitting and staring at the bamboo tube. Here I would like to tell a story as an allegory to those who aren't acquainted with the Dhamma. There once was a man living in the woods who, with his 5 sons, started growing crops in a clearing about a mile from their home village. He built a small shack at the clearing and would often take his sons to stay there. One morning he started a fire in the shack and told his sons to look after the fire, for he was going out to hunt for food in the forest. If the fire goes out, he told them, get some fire from my bamboo tube and start it up again. Then he set out to search for food to feed his sons. After he left, his sons got so wrapped up in enjoying their play that when they finally took a look at the fire, they found it was completely out. So they had the first son go and get some fire to start it up again. The first son walked over and tried knocking on the bamboo tube, but he didn't see any fire. So they had the second son get some fire from the tube. He opened it up, but didn't see any fire inside. All he saw were 2 bamboo chips, but he didn't know what to do with them. So the third son came over for a look, and, since he didn't see any fire, he took a knife to cut the tube in half, but still didn't see any fire. The fourth son went over and, seeing the 2 halves lying there, shaved them down into thin strips to find the fire in them, but didn't see any fire at all. Finally, the 5th son went over to look for fire, but before he went, he said to his brothers, "What's the matter with you guys that you can't get any fire from the bamboo tube? What a bunch of fools you are. I'll go get it myself." With that, he went to look at the bamboo tube and found it split into strips lying in a pile. Realizing what his brothers had done and thinking, "What a bunch of harebrains," he reached for a mortar and pestle and ground up the bamboo strips to find the fire in them. By the time he ran out of strength, he had ground them into a powder, but he still hadn't found any fire, so he snuck off to play by himself. Eventually, toward noon, the father returned from the forest and found that the fire had gone out. So he asked his sons about it, and they told him how they had looked for fire in the bamboo tube without finding any. "Idiots," he thought angrily to himself. "They've taken my fire starter and pounded it to bits. For that, I won't fix them any food. Let them starve." As a result, the boys didn't get anything to eat the entire day. Those of us who aren't acquainted with the brightness of the Dhamma lying within us, who don't believe that the Dhamma has value for ourselves and others, are lacking in discernment, like the boys looking for fire in the bamboo tube. Thus, we bring about our own ruin in various ways, wasting our lives. born in darkness, living in darkness, dying in darkness, and then reborn in more darkness all over again. Even though goodness lies within us, we can't get any use from it, and so we'll suffer for a long time to come, like the boys who ruined their father's fire starter and so had to go without food. The Dhamma lies within us, but we don't look for it. If we hope for goodness, whether on a low or a high level, we'll have to look here, inside, if we are to find what's truly good. But before we can know ourselves in this way, we first have to know, through study and practice, the principles taught by the Buddha. Recorded Dhamma, the Pariyatti Dhamma, is simply one of the symbols of the Buddha's teachings. The important point is to actualize the Dhamma through the complete practice of virtue, concentration, and discernment. This is an essential part of the religion, the part that forms the inner symbol of all those who practice rightly and well. Whether the religion will be good or bad, whether it will prosper or decline, depends on our practice, not on the recorded Dhamma, because the recorded Dhamma is merely a symbol. So if we aim at goodness, we should focus on developing our inner quality through the Dhamma of practice, the Patipatti Dhamma. As for the main point of Buddhism, that's the Dhamma of attainment, the Pativedha Dhamma, the transcendent quality, Nibbana. That's as much as Ajahn Lee that I'll read for this evening. I'll read a little bit of Luang Por Chah to end. And I read through some of this book last winter retreat, and during some of our final tea times, I was mentioning about Still Forest Pool being the first book that I read, the book that my dad found in a used bookstore and sent to me when I was having a rough time at the age of 20. So I can't remember if this is the exact one, but I think it might be copy that I brought here, or it might have already been here. So I'll read just a few talks from this. These are short excerpts of Ajahn Chah's teachings, and it's an early translation done by Jack Cornfield and Paul Breiter. This is the first talk. The Simple Path. Traditionally, the Eightfold Path is taught with 8 steps, such as right understanding, right speech, right concentration, and so forth. But the true Eightfold Path is within us. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, a tongue, and a body. These 8 doors are our entire path, and the mind is the one that walks on the path. Know these doors, examine them, and all the Dhamma will be revealed. The heart of the path is so simple. No need for long explanations. Give up clinging to love and hate. Just rest with things as they are. That is all I do in my own practice. Do not try to become anything. Do not make yourself into anything. Do not be a meditator. Do not become enlightened. When you sit, let it be. When you walk, let it be. Grasp at nothing. Resist nothing. Of course, there are dozens of meditation techniques to develop samadhi and many kinds of vipassana. But it all comes back to this: just let it all be. Step over here where it is cool, out of the battle. Why not give it a try? Do you dare? The middle way. The Buddha does not want us to follow the double path, desire and indulgence on the one hand and fear and aversion on the other. Just be aware of pleasure, he teaches. Anger, fear, dissatisfaction are not the path of the yogi, but the path of worldly people. The tranquil person walks the middle path of right practice, leaving grasping on the left and fear and aversion on the right. One who undertakes the path of practice must follow this middle way. I will not take an interest in pleasure or pain. I will lay them down. But, of course, it is hard at first. It's as though we were being kicked on both sides. Like a cowbell or a pendulum, we are knocked back and forth. When the Buddha preached his first sermon, he discoursed on these two extremes because that's where attachment lies. The desire for happiness kicks from one side, suffering and dissatisfaction kick from the other. These two are always besieging us, but when you walk the middle path, you put them both down. Don't you see? If you follow these extremes, you will simply strike out when you are angry and grab for what attracts you, without the slightest patience or forbearance. How long can you go on being trapped in this way? Consider it. If you like something, you follow after it when liking arises. Yet it's just drawing you on to seek suffering. The mind of desire is really clever. Where will it lead you next? The Buddha teaches us to keep laying down the extremes. This is the path of right practice, the path leading us out of birth and becoming. On this path, there is neither pleasure nor pain, neither good nor evil. Alas, the mass of humans filled with desiring just strive for pleasure and always bypass the middle, missing the path of the excellent one, the path of the seeker of truth. Attached to birth and becoming, happiness and suffering, good and evil, the one who does not travel this middle path cannot become a wise one, cannot find liberation. Our path is straight, the path of tranquility and pure awareness, calmed of both elation and sorrow. If your heart is like this, you can stop asking other people for guidance. You will see that when the heart and mind is unattached, it is abiding in its normal state. When it stirs from the normal because of various thoughts and feelings, the process of thought construction takes place, in which illusions are created. Learn to see through this process. When the mind is stirred from normal, it leads away from right practice to one of the extremes of indulgence or aversion, thereby creating more illusion, more thought construction. Good or bad only arise in your mind. If you keep a watch on your mind, studying this one topic your whole life, I guarantee you will never be bored. Okay, we'll leave it at that for the reading. And we have a few minutes if anybody has any comments or questions on that. I quite appreciate having these kind of really clearly delineated writings from Ajahn Lee Dhammadaro, and sometimes it can be a little bit dry, but I think it is important to have those really clear definitions, to know the clear definitions of terms and just what is the Buddha, how's the Buddha defined, the external Buddha, the internal Buddha, and the Dhamma, what is Dhamma practice? It's like we could think of practice as the modification of our behavior of body, speech, and mind to relinquish the unwholesome and develop the wholesome. So to have a kind of a synopsis of that, I find that very, very helpful. And then to have Luangpo Cha's more kind of down-home village style of teaching to augment that. I find it a very good way to try to come to an understanding of these things.